Good afternoon. My name is Sue Clark Johnson, and I am the Executive Director of the Morrison Institute for Public Policy at Arizona State University. Welcome, and thank you very much for coming. The phenomenal growth of independent voters in recent years has surprised most political observers. Independent voters presently outnumber registered Democrats in Arizona, and soon they'll surpass the number of Republicans to be the leading party, or no party preference, as we like to officially call them in Arizona. As you know, this election, Arizona voters are deciding on Proposition 121. The so-called top two open primary has several elements to consider regarding nonpartisan and independent politics. So we are extremely fortunate today to have two superstars in the independent and nonpartisan movement. Both have recently published books which have received rave reviews for their insightfulness about the state of politics today. We anticipate that they'll help us understand what it all means today, and more importantly, what an independent and nonpartisan electorate may mean for us tomorrow. Moderating our program will be Don Budinger. He is the chairman of both the Rodell Foundation and of Science Foundation Arizona. He is a member of Morrison Institute's Board of Advisors and its Executive Committee, and is a Morrison Institute Distinguished Associate. But most importantly for us today, Don Budinger is developing yet one more career as an expert interviewer of notable guests, including former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And upcoming, here comes the plug, everybody, and upcoming at Morrison's State of Our State Conference, November 29th, please save that date, November 29th, he will have what we expect will be one of the very first in-depth discussions with Arizona Senator Jon Kyl on his perspective of the state of Arizona and our nation as he approaches retirement. Don't miss it. You can register on Morrison's website, morrisoninstitute.asu.edu, and we have flyers for you at the doors when you leave that you can pick up and take with you and see what the rest of the program is. But for now, please help me welcome Don Budinger.
Sue, thank you. A little pressure there from that introduction, and I appreciate that. It's very kind. Tonight is about politics. Tonight is about understanding the role of partisanship in politics and the role of the independent voter. And we have two experts with us to do this. This is an interactive experience. We're going to have Q&A, plenty of time at the end of this. We may have some colleagues come in and have to leave as we go, so it's very open and casual. Please don't be disturbed by that. So let me share with you a little bit about our two guests today. Jackie Salit is to my immediate right. She is the president of independentvoting.org, the country's leading strategy and organizing center for independence with organizations in 40 states. Since 2005, she has hosted a biannual national conference for independence and has built the largest network of independent leaders and activists in the country. She managed Michael Bloomberg's campaign for the mayor of New York on the independence party line and played a crucial role in delivering three things: the party's overall margin of victory in 2001, the exodus of 47% of African-American voters from the Democratic Party to Bloomberg, and the historic 150,000 votes for Bloomberg's reelection on the independent party line in 2009. Her political commentaries have appeared in numerous publications. She's been a featured commentator on CNN, on MSNBC, on CNBC, on CBS, on PBS, on Fox, and C-SPAN. And she is a regular contributor to the nationally syndicated radio program, Fairness Radio. She's also the author of a new book called Independence Rising: Outsider Movements, Third Parties, and the Struggle for a Post-Partisan America. Jackie, welcome. To Jackie's right is Mickey Edwards, a former congressman from the state of Oklahoma, a Republican congressman from 1997 until, from 1977 to 1993. He served in several positions of leadership in the Republican Party in the Congress, was chairman of the Republican Party Policy Committee, is a member of both the House Appropriations and Budget Committees, and the ranking member of the House Subcommittee on Foreign Operations. After leaving the Congress, Mickey has taught government and public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Business and Government. He has taught at the Harvard Law School, and he was a visiting professor at Georgetown after that. Mickey has chaired task forces on foreign policy for the Brookings Institution in the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's an advisor to the U.S. State Department. He is currently a lecturer at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. He's vice president of the Aspen Institute and executive director of the Aspen Rodell Fellowships in Public Leadership. Mickey has co-authored and authored several books, including his newest, which is on a pathway to be a bestseller, called The Parties versus the People: How to Turn Democrats and Republicans into Americans. Mickey, welcome.
Thanks.
Jackie, if we may, I'd like to start with you. Americans report in the polls that they are very concerned, possibly even a stronger word, upset, somewhat disillusioned at how partisan everything has become. And we seem to have drifted away from the role of the party to support a certain set of ideas about how to solve our nation's problems. And it's become a game of beat the opponent, winner take all. In your view, the role of the independent, is that a potential solution? And is the problem of partisanship as ugly as it seems to be?
Yes, to the latter. It is as ugly as it seems to be. Actually, it's even uglier, because I think that the effects of partisan paralysis, partisan gridlock, the pervasive conduct of partisans in legislatures from the state to the federal level result in policies that are more and more detrimental to the American people and being able to move the country forward. So I think that you can't understate the problem of partisanship. It's very, very, very serious. Very, very serious. I actually think that it's the most serious problem confronting the American people today. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that during the course of this discussion. You raise the issue of independence, independent voters. Just to say a couple of basic things about that, and I love, by the way, that you frame your question in terms of are independents the solution. Usually it takes 2 hours to get somebody to say that. So I'm very impressed that it's your first question right off the bat, and I really feel great about that, because I think there's a very important truth to that, and let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm sure that most people in this audience are aware of the size of the independent voter bloc in the country and surely in the state. Here in the state, I think it's about 33% of the electorate are independents. Nationally, the percentage is something in the neighborhood of 40% or 42%. This is just an extraordinary trend away from parties in a political system and in a political culture which is so heavily based on parties and so determined by party alignment, party allegiance, party loyalty, the way that parties frame issues, that 4 in 10 Americans are saying, I do not want to be a part of any political party, is deep, you know. And so I think that when you raise the question, are independents the solution? Here's how I would answer that. It's a very, very complicated question.
And we'll get to more of this throughout the whole
we'll get to
hour.
more of it,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
But just to say one thing about it, I think that as independents declare their independence and as they become organized, that they will lead a national transformation of the political culture. I believe that that's where it will come from, and in many respects, I think it's actually starting to happen. And I feel really, really good about that. Very, very excited about that.
Great. Mickey, in your book, you talk about the change in the parties. Years ago, each party had a conservative and a liberal and a moderate wing, and they kind of fought among themselves until they finally came up with a candidate. That seems now to have changed to the Democrat Party has the most left winner, or that's how those primaries seem to go. The Republican parties are on the right, and who could be the most right? In your view, is that right? Have we had that dramatic a change inside the makeup of the parties and the way elections are conducted?
Well, first let me say that I'm delighted to be here. I love Phoenix and the Institute. I'm delighted to be back with Jackie. The last time we did this was in New York, and it was great fun. And I agree with everything she said. But, it's part of, this is a constitutional question, Don. It's a constitutional question. We have, believe it or not, I'll get to your question too. Yeah, I'm a politician, we do that. We have a system that is a combination of a republic. It is a republic because the majority will is constrained by a constitutional system, but it's a democracy too, in the sense that we are supposed to be able to select the people who are going to make the laws, decide who will be on the Supreme Court. I mean, all these powers are congressional powers. They're not presidential powers. Whether we go to war, what we spend, how much we tax, those are important issues. And our system of government is that the people should decide. Now, the American people don't fit the description that you just gave, which was that the Republican Party is all to the right, or the Democratic Party all to the left. Why does it look like that's the case? It looks like that's the case because we created this political party system with these primaries that the candidates, incentive systems work. And the incentives we've created through our primary system are to be intransigent, to not compromise, because if you say, I'm going to talk to people who have different points of view, you're going to get knocked off in your primary. Well, does that mean that the American people, or the Republicans, if they knock you off in a primary, that they feel that way? No. No, when we talked before, when Christine O'Donnell beat Mike Castle in Delaware, state of 1 million people, she only got 30,000 votes. Why in the world do we allow somebody who gets 30,000 votes to tell 1 million people, I'm sorry, you don't have these choices anymore? It's because of the party system we created that lets the people who are very unrepresentative narrow our choices, control access to the ballot. So I think if you look at the Republican Party as those people who are holding elective office as Republicans, or the Democratic Party as those people who are Democrats holding elective office, you get a very different picture than if you look at Republicans nationally or Democrats nationally. Our primary system has produced an extremely unrepresentative set of elected officials.
Yeah, we want to come back to that. We want to understand that more deeply. If 40% of us are independents, and most people consider themselves thoughtful and open-minded, why do we elect who we elect? I want to come back to that later. But Jackie, in your book, Independence Rising, you have a chapter titled, ironically, The Parties versus the People, in which you discuss some election reforms taking place in various states. And they didn't collude on that, right?
We're doing co-promotion.
That's right.
California did this a couple of years ago, and one of their propositions, Arizona has a proposition on the upcoming ballot, 121, to do essentially the same thing.
Yep.
Share your view of that. Is it the right thing to do? Does it work? What do you expect to be the result of that?
I think it is the right thing to do on a lot of different levels. First of all, if you have a political system which by its very nature and structure excludes 40% of the country, you have a system that's not workable. You have to do something about that. That's not democratic, it's not wholesome, and it doesn't permit and promote the level of exchange of ideas and innovation and bringing nonpartisan approaches to policy into the public square. So at that level, I think it's critically important to change the primary system, and I give Mickey a huge amount of credit for really focusing a big spotlight on this issue. In California, as you say, the system was adopted in 2010 over the heads of most politicians in the state. The parties don't like it. The politicians don't like it. which is why I don't really count you, by the way, as a politician. I think you're in a special category or something. But look, here's the thing. As long as the election system is based on closed primaries with enormously depressed turnout, which is largely what the situation is, you're going to have a situation where it's impossible to introduce new ideas and to build new kinds of coalitions. Since Top 2, it's called Top 2 in California, was enacted, there's been one season of trial. And right away, you see, with virtually no time elapsed, you start to see new things happening. You start to see the conventional wisdom upended. You start to see unpredictable results in the first round, which lead to new kinds of coalitions for the second round. I think that is so important. We've got to break out of the categories, the constraints, and the controls that the parties impose upon us as voters and as citizens of what is supposed to be a vital democracy. So the Top 2 system is not a panacea. It doesn't cure all of the problems. But you can't go from where we are now to an absolute cure. What you have to do is re-engineer things in ways that create new environments and make new kinds of activity, new kinds of conversations possible. That's what's happening in California. I am so excited that, you know, a similar proposition is on the ballot here in Arizona. I think if this passes in Arizona, this will be a shot heard around the world. I really, really do, because I think it will indicate that in very different locales with very different political dynamics, that people are coming together. And it's not just independents. It's independent-minded Democrats and Republicans coming together to say, hey, we have to take responsibility for changing the political culture, and these are some steps that we can take to start to make that happen.
Well, if we look at this from the perspective of the parties, they might say, wait a second, we ought to have the right to have the people of our party, we should have a choice in who that is. That sounds a little bit compelling in this argument on the other side, if you will. What's your view of that? Is that the old paradigm, or is that an outdated idea, or what's your view of that?
Well, I think it's a shell game, actually. And I think and for constitutional, it has constitutional implications. I'm not an attorney, and I'm not a constitutional expert in the way that Mickey is, but here's what I would say about this. See, the parties like to argue that they are private associations that have the right to decide who's going to participate in their candidate selection process. Okay, that's an argument. I buy that. Then why are the taxpayers paying for that primary? If it's a private association going through some kind of internal process to select a representative and a candidate, then go do it, and go pay for it, and go set up the apparatus that you need in order to conduct it. But don't turn around and then claim, after you've kept 40% of the country out of participating in your process, don't then claim, oh, but this is really a public process and we want the taxpayers to pay for it.
Mickey, you agree?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm not anti-political party. I am anti-allowing political parties to control access to the ballot. Yeah. I'm against allowing these private, self-seeking, power-seeking clubs to tell the rest of the people in the state who they can choose between. Well, you got to see, it's a collusion here between, it's two things. Well, one is you have the closed primary, you know, that has small groups of the most partisan deciding who that club's nominee will be. But then they've also, the two parties have colluded to have sore loser laws in 46 of our 50 states. And that means that if you ran for your party nomination in a primary or in a convention, and you lost, you're not allowed to be on the ballot in November. That's why Mike Castle in Delaware, after she got 30,000 votes, he couldn't be on the ballot. It's why Senator Robert Bennett in Utah, because of the votes of 2,000 people. There's 3 million people in Utah. Because of 2,000 people at their convention in Salt Lake City, they did not have the choice anymore. So I'm all in favor of having political parties and Rotary clubs and, all this stuff. I'm cool, but they should not be able to tell you, what your district lines look like, and whether or not a farmer is going to be represented by somebody who's never been to a farm. You shouldn't allow parties to be able, because it serves their advantage, you should not allow parties to say to all the millions of people in the state, we'll tell you, you want choice in everything you do, right? You want choice when you buy a cell phone, when you want to buy a shirt, you buy shoes. We shouldn't tell you that. But when it comes to the people who decide whether we go to war, you can only choose between the two people we say. And that's what's wrong here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a complete subversion of the idea of popular rule, of the fact that the people choose the representatives. And that's why I will say, I wrote, obviously channeling Jackie, the parties versus the people, which I agree with. But I didn't write the editors of The Atlantic wrote the subtitle, which was How to Turn Republicans and Democrats into Americans. And when they said that to me, I said, that sounds a little harsh, doesn't it? And they said, well, did you read what you wrote? So, it's, I think it really is a serious undermining of the American people's right to choose their leaders.
A lot of people say that what they want is a discussion of ideas, a discussion and understanding of values, an understanding of how we respect the Constitution, but we have a 21st century responsiveness given how the world has changed, and yet our campaigns rarely have that level of substance. I don't want to hear about why your opponent's such a bad person. Why do we have this disconnect between what most people say they want to hear and the campaign conditions that we see that results in sometimes the people who are the nastiest end up winning? What's going on? Vicki?
Wow. I have to say, I'm really comfortable in front of all of you attacking the political party system. I'm less comfortable attacking you. But part of it is, we have allowed this system to grow, and in order to be able to demand of the candidates who are running the kinds of serious deliberative discussions about major issues and the various approaches to those, we need to do, I make an exception for all the people in this room, but except for all of you in this room, everybody else is out there only talking to people they already agree with, only listening to radio shows or TV shows or reading newspaper columns by people they agree with, and talking to this book, The Big Sort by Bill Bishop 4 years ago. We talk, most of you, not you, your friends, talk only to people who already think the way they do. And so we don't demand more because we come into the political process with certitude. We know the answers because we heard Rush or we heard Keith Olbermann, and so we know the answers. And we don't say to our candidates, we want a serious, thoughtful discussion, put all the issues on the table, and let's talk as friends about what's the right way, the better ways to deal with it. So, look, we got to, and I will tell you, I'm right here in her town. If Sandra Day O'Connor was in this room, she would say, well, how about trying a little civic education? How about teaching critical thinking? So, we've got to also have a culture that rewards those things, Don.
So, Jackie, how do we change the rewards?
Yeah.
What ideas or what platforms or what incentive tools do we have to change that?
Well, some of them are, these political reforms that I've been talking about, that Nikki's been talking about, open primaries, nonpartisan redistricting,
changing the way Congress operates, the way various state legislatures operate, making sure there's nonpartisan administration of elections, all of these things, which at one level, you know, when you talk about them, they're like about the unsexiest list of issues you can possibly come up with. People's eyes start to roll back in their heads a little bit, and I appreciate that. And yet, these process concerns really do go to the heart of how we reorganize what's going on. And I just wanted to add something, though, because I agree completely with everything that you said, Mickey, in your response to Don's last question, but I also see something perhaps slightly different in the picture, if I might share that, which is that in addition to all of what you said, I think that something has happened over the last 5 or 6 years in this country, which is very hard to discern, but important to look at. I think in 2008, in the presidential election, that there was a movement in this country for nonpartisan reform and for trying to move to a post-partisan America. And I think that movement took the form of the election, the campaign for, and the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States. Whatever one thinks of Obama and how he ran that campaign and how he's performed as president, in some ways this isn't even really about Obama. This is about what the American people did. And independents, by the way, were very, very influential in 2008. In the states that had open primaries, they chose the Democratic nominee, they chose the Republican nominee, and then they chose the President of the United States. So independents were a huge driving force in this political uprising that said, we have to change the political culture. Then I think what happened is that the parties answered that. And I think their answer to that, to us, to the American people, was, oh, no, we're not doing that. And I think that the conduct of this presidential campaign, and I watched the presidential debate last night, and I've watched all the debates and followed the commentary and all of that, I think the intensity of the partisanship that we're seeing, the intensity of the very thing that you're talking about, is a direct response to the American people having spoken out and said, we need to make a change. I really do think that. Now, you know, history doesn't move in a linear way. Things move forward, and then there are reactions to that. But I think the issue of civic education, of enlivening the public dialogue, of making people more directly stakeholders in the policy-making process, I think that began to happen in 2008. And it wasn't around a set of programmatics. It was around a cultural statement about the nature of our political process. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing a very, very strong backlash against that. Now, we're going to have to recover from that, and we're going to have to regroup.
Let me ask you, from a boots-on-the-ground standpoint, what you did in New York, a complex, dynamic, international city, par excellence, entrenched political views, hard to get very many constituencies together behind anything. What was the role of the independent that you helped lead? Why Mayor Bloomberg won and won substantially?
As you say, New York is a very, very partisan town. You know, something like 90% of major American cities have nonpartisan municipal elections. New York doesn't. It's one of the last great holdouts, you know. And when the Independence Party and the independent movement negotiated with Bloomberg around his candidacy going back to 2001, we got him to make a commitment to support a shift to nonpartisan elections and to use the mayoralty to try to take things in that direction. And he agreed to that, and we promoted that very, very substantially. And that was the beginning of branding to use a marketing term, of branding Mike as an independent, as a nonpartisan, as someone who was going to really take seriously the issue of what it was going to take to create a whole new policy-making playing field. And that drew tremendous attention and tremendous support. And as we were talking about before the program started, that was a very close election. Mike won that only by 35,000 votes, and he got 59,000 votes on the Independence Party ticket, which was crucial to his election. And after that, we spent 10 years building that movement and building those concepts. We actually put nonpartisans, a top two system, on the ballot in New York. And we got creamed. We got creamed. The political machines came after us with a vengeance. But we built off of that, and we continued to grow off of that, and that became a part of the history of New York City. Now, we'll see what happens over the next 10 years. That's a very, very big open question and the topic of a whole other discussion. But that's what it was about. We were able to give the voters, and not just the independents, there's 1 million independent voters in New York City, but we were able to give everyone the opportunity to make a statement about their support for nonpartisan governance. And that was huge.
Yeah. Mickey, I don't know if we have any data on this. It's very anecdotal at best, but it seems like if you looked at all the campaigns, the national campaigns and a lot of local campaigns in states, most people spend the majority of their time as a critic of their opponent or of the current performance of elected leaders and incumbents, and less time on the solutions that they would provide, especially the specifics of those solutions. It seems like the way you get to Washington is to run against it, and the way you stay there and keep your job is to bring the money back home. A, is that a correct observation in your view? And number two, if it is, what's the role of the independent to have people at the local level have a national conscience? So for example, let's just say in a state you had somebody running for the Senate or the House, and they said, the military base in our state, in my district, is duplication. And to save the national budget, we ought to close it. That would take a level of courage that we haven't seen.
Courage is one word, yeah.
But if that were the right, if that kind of view of what needs to occur were to happen, A, can that happen? And B, is the independent voter a factor in such a thing?
I think the independent voter is a major factor, but I think that I want to turn it around, because we're not going to fix this problem by focusing on the behavior of the people in office. We can do a lot. You know, the program that we're working on, the Rodell program and Bill, is to try to affect the behavior of the people in public office. But you can work to try to make people different, but as long as the reward system is what it is, it's not going to change. So when you take the negative campaigning, which in fact is really it's not only negative, but it's, I mean, can you imagine what would happen if somebody like John Kennedy today said, ask not what your country can do for you? That's all people ask now. Is, what can your country, what can the country do for me? When somebody who starts running a negative campaign is told by constituents who show up at a meeting, we like you, we like what you say. If you run another negative ad, we're going to vote against you. And when you pay a price for your behavior, then the behavior will change. When you run negative ads and then you win, you get rewarded for that, it won't change. I mean, whether you're in politics or in business or anything else you are, I mean, you're smart enough to figure out, what button do you push that causes the coins to drop? And we're pushing the wrong buttons. We are saying, if you behave in a way that doesn't talk honestly about what positions you take, or that cause you to just run all these ads about how bad the other person is, they ought to get a message. And I'll tell you what, people in politics, including consultants, are pretty smart. They read the tea leaves. And when they see that the guys who are running the negative campaigns get beat, they're going to stop doing it. So, I mean, there are ways that we can change this. And it's the same thing when you get people who are in office and they are, constantly, they're giving speeches every day about the size of the deficit. And we've run up this enormous national debt. And government is too big. And we also want you to give me money for this program in my district. And you're not called out on it, then they're going to keep doing it. I mean, it's, I will say, I'm going to give credit to one of my opponents, who, because I was pretty good about bringing stuff back to the district, and one of my opponents said, pork is pork, even if it's in your own pig pen. And I kept thinking, I wish I'd thought of that. So, I mean, you do have to change what we reward.
Yeah.
Let me go down in the weeds just a little bit on the next question. The rules in the House and Senate, or how it operates, how you get on committees and how you vote, and when votes are dropped and when bills are dropped or not dropped and all that kind of thing. It seems like it's dysfunctional to the outside observer. If that's true, and if that needs some substantial transformation or reform, is it possible?
Sure, it's possible by, most members of Congress are pretty brave people. I mean, they don't walk around being afraid they're going to be shot. They don't walk around fearing that their airplane's going to crash. What do they fear? They fear you. They fear the voters. And they go back and they have town meetings or neighborhood meetings, and they're meeting with their constituents. I told you earlier before about what caused me to write this book. I mean, in the acknowledgments, I've acknowledged a person whose name I don't know that I ever knew. And it was a town meeting I had in my district. And somebody asked me why I had not done something, whatever it was. And I, being the politician, said, well, I'm a Republican. The Democrats control Congress. They wouldn't let me do this. They wouldn't let me bring up the bill. And this person pointed his finger at me and said, I am so damn sick and tired of hearing Republican this, Democrat that. Everybody in the room stood and cheered. And I never did it again. So look, I mean, we have a system. The choke point on what makes legislation go forward or die is the committee system. We now have a system where the party leaders choose what committee you get, even though every single member is an equal member of Congress, same size constituency, same size salary, same oath of office, but party leaders decide who's going to be on the committee, and they decided in exchange for your promise in advance that you're going to support the party position. You haven't read the bill yet. There isn't even a bill. You haven't had a hearing yet. But you took your brain out of your skull and you put it in the lockbox and you handed it to the party and said, you control me. And we can change this. I'm kind of where Jackie is on a lot of stuff, and including this. Yeah, it can make a difference. I believe we are at the cusp of the next progressive revolution. Only we're going to define progressive. The progressive movement was to take the decisions out of the small groups in the smoke-filled rooms. Now we're back again because of the unforeseen consequences, of small groups controlling the outcome. And I think we're at a place where the American people are going to rise up and say, look, bud, if you voted 90%, 95% in some cases of the time with your party, you're out. Because we didn't elect you to be a hack for the party. Where is this starting? Started in Washington State in 2006, started in California in 2010, and it's getting ready to get a major, major boost right here in Arizona.
Jackie, the role of money changed dramatically. Citizens United, never before seen individual people buck up $100 million to fund a campaign or a group of candidates. A, your thoughts about that, and B, how does that affect the opportunity for independents to play in this new game?
Such a complicated issue. I have a somewhat unpopular position on the campaign finance reform issue. So
So I'll tell you that I know that it's unpopular before I tell you what it is.
It's okay to share.
I don't think that the point of address can be campaign finance reform. I just don't. In some respects, maybe this is an entirely pragmatic position, but since Watergate, and we've had a generation of focus on trying to keep the money out of politics, and all that's happened is that more money has come into politics. So at a certain point, at least for me, at a sheer pragmatic level, you have to say, well, there's something wrong with this picture. I just think it's a very difficult thing in a society which is so totally driven by money to decide in this area we're not going to have the money allowed in. So my focus really is more on the issue of bringing people in rather than keeping the money out, and that's a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. Bring people in and create opportunities for new commonalities of interest to arise, and then just do a tremendous amount of grassroots fundraising. The American people are enormously generous, and my organization, which is a very small organization, it sustains itself off of those kinds of contributions, of people saying, yeah, we've got to create a different kind of system. With respect to Citizens United, I know everybody is aghast about this, everybody, and you know, is pointing to it as it's now become the root of all evil or something. I think and I understand what's being said about that, I do. But I think another side of it is that, if you will, one of the plus sides of Citizens United is that it opens the door to funding things other than political parties. And so I think that's going to increase competition, and I think it's going to put more pressure on the parties. And I think that's a good thing. I don't have a picture of the pot of happiness, gold happiness at the end of the rainbow off of that. It's obviously a very, difficult road, but I don't think that's the place to focus on. I really don't.
Can I add to that? I agree a lot with the sentiments that are driving what Jackie said. I would amend it a little bit. In terms of Citizens United, and I said this at the meeting, so I'm sorry you have to hear it again, Don, but I am willing to accept that there is a possibility and maybe even a likelihood that some of the members of the Supreme Court understand constitutional law. I mean, I don't know, but some do. But here's what, I don't know how many lawyers are in the room, but I'll tell you, here's what they don't know. Here's what they don't know. They don't know corporate law. Because corporate law, by definition, when you incorporate, you are distinguished from citizens, because you get immunities and protections not available to non-corporations, to individual citizens. So, I mean, the idea that a corporation is a person is it's total nonsense. But I love the principles behind what Jackie is saying, and I would say probably I've gone even more nutty, but in my book I have a chapter on money, and because Jackie's point is empower people, and I just take that, I love it, and I take it one step further. I think we need a system which prohibits corporate contributions and labor union contributions and political party contributions and political action committee contributions. And so what I call for is no contributions except from a living human being. Just people. That when you stand in line to cast a vote, what does every voter have in common? It's a living human being. And so if using your money is the same idea of affecting the outcome as casting your vote in other forms, limit it to people. And I think that returns exactly where you're talking about, put the people back in charge.
Let me Let me ask you, too, from a slightly different perspective we don't hear much about anymore. You know, at the end of the day, we have a representative form of government. We're getting what we deserve, if you want to look at it that way, despite what you're talking about, the concerns of the party and the power and all that stuff and the role of the independent. Is it possible that we have changed to such an extent that we're more the problem than we think we are? For example, when we went to war in World War II, that generation of Americans sacrificed. The top tax rate in World War II to pay for it in the Marshall Plan was 94% of the top incomes. We go to war now, we cut taxes, we borrow from overseas sources. Have we lost our resolve? Have we lost our deep commitment to the country's future that shows up in the way politics works? Jackie?
I think what we've lost is our capacity to shape the culture of our country. I think that's gotten away from us. And in some respects, if I had to say, what's the independent political movement about at its core, at its heart? Not just the list of reforms that need to be enacted or, you know, all of that, all of which are very, very important. But if I had to say what animates it at almost at a spiritual level and at a character level and at a moral level, it has to do with the question that you're raising. I think we have lost the capacity to shape and develop our own culture. And I think we want that back. And I think that the experience that we're having as a nation right now is that we don't have the mechanisms available to us that allow us to do that.
How could we get those? What would they be? What would they look like?
Well, it's much of what we're talking about here tonight, but I think maybe to put it in slightly different terms than we have been discussing it, I think that we have to create processes that allow us to reflect the national interest, the community interest, rather than the party interest and the special interest. And I think that the system, we're talking about incentives and, you know, and I think we have to look at the system and take seriously the extent to which the system incentivizes divisiveness, selfishness, and disunity. That is the system that we have now. And that is a very upsetting thing. I find that very upsetting. But my experience of what's going on in the country is that in different ways, and perhaps in some ways that haven't even been fully articulated yet, I think the American people are trying to say, we want that back. We want to have the capacity to develop ourselves as a nation. And we're frustrated and in many cases angry, and but I think that's what we're looking for. So I feel very close to what you're pointing to here. I think it's so important, and I think it really goes right to the heart of what's going on.
Yeah, and you can tell from the audience, you've got everybody's attention here. This is a sensitive subject, but this is the kind of thing we want to take on in this venue. Mickey, your view of this?
I want to amend a little bit what you said, your question, because no, we don't have a representative government, representative form of government. We did have, we were supposed to have. The constitutional system gives us a representative form of government. We don't have one now. And let me draw an example. I mean, that's because of the closed primaries, you know, that you can't choose among all the options that might otherwise be available to you. So let me look at the California elections, and this is one that everybody talks about right now. The race in California between two incumbent Democratic liberal members of Congress, Howard Berman and Brad Sherman. And they have the top two, or as I call it, it's a general election with runoff, which is, I think, a more accurate description. So in that district, there was no chance anybody was going to win except a very liberal Democrat. That's what the district is. And they had the race. And the top two were Berman and Brad Sherman. And they're now in the runoff. Before 2010, before California changed its system, what would happen is who would win between Berman and Sherman? Whichever person could most appeal to the hardline left, that I am going to be the truest. I am not going to budge. I am going to stand firm with your left ideology. And that's who would win. Now that they've opened up the system, who is going to win? Two liberal Democrats. The one who's going to win is the one who can also get the votes of independents, Greens, libertarians, whoever else, because now in order to win, when you have this kind of a system, that's representative. You have to appeal to the entire electorate. And then you can say the result of that was representative government. But we've lost that. And so when you're choosing between, so let me use a more shocking example. How in the world does an idiot like Todd Akin become the nominee of a major political party? How does it happen? Well, it happened, there are 6 million people in Missouri, and he got about 200,000 votes in a closed Republican primary because of the sore loser laws that the parties colluded to create. All the other Republicans on that ballot that he beat, including Sarah Steelman, who held statewide office, very good reputation, they are not any longer eligible to run. And so if she were, and the people of Missouri could choose who are the people we want, because everybody's on the ballot, there's a very good chance that all those people who don't like Claire McCaskill, who want the Republicans to capture the seat, would, turn to Steelman or somebody else. And Todd Akin would be Trivial Pursuit. Nobody would remember him. Now he could possibly be a United States Senator, because we have taken away from the people of Missouri the ability to choose somebody who is representative of their points of view. I think that's how bad it's been.
I want to ask one last question before we go to questions from the audience. Are the two of you optimistic?
I am. Absolutely.
Yes.
Quickly, why?
I think that the American people are paying attention to these issues. And I think people are looking for and are open to new ways of doing things. I see it everywhere I go. I travel around the country. As you mentioned, our organization, independentvoting.org, has chapters in 40 states. I'm talking to people from all walks of life. I did an event in central Harlem a few weeks ago, and then in an upscale area in Saratoga Springs. From all walks of life, my experience in just talking to ordinary folks is we've got to find some new ways of doing this, and we will. And we will. And so I'm enormously optimistic. And also, I'm so excited about being here in Arizona, and so excited that 121 is on the ballot here. But yeah, I feel very, very optimistic.
Yeah, Jackie, thank you. Mickey?
I just got through speaking to a packed theater, the size of movie theater, in Santa Barbara. I spoke to 500 people in San Diego. I was the keynoter at the convention of the Society of Opinion Journalists, editorial writers and bloggers. I mean, I want to tell you, there's a hunger for this. USA Today had this headline, that the American people are fleeing from the parties. Now, I think the revolution has begun. I mean, when you have Washington State, and then you have California, which is bigger than many countries, and now Arizona on the verge. I mean, I think the people are starting to say, we want our country back. We don't want it back from the Democrats. We don't want it back from the Republicans. We want it back from both of you. We just want the people to have the right to make the choices and not let your little private clubs tell us, who we can choose between. So no, I mean, I agree with Jackie. I think the revolution is beginning, and I think I don't know if it'll happen this year or next year, but look what happened in California. Not only the Berman-Sherman thing, as soon as they made their changes, what happened? 12 members of the California delegation, 1/4 of the California U.S. House delegation retired rather than go through it. Rather than go through letting the people actually make the choices instead of defined by their parties. So yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic. I don't know how long it'll take, but we're going to change it.
Okay, time to open up to the audience for questions, and one ground rule, please. A question, not a speech. Who would like to go first?
I have a microphone here.
Do I see a hand up? Oh, Tom Hensey.
Hello, Don.
How are you?
Obviously, the two of you are on the vanguard of something that's worthy and exciting, but I'm curious. Surely, at one time, if not now, there was something of value that was good and useful in partisan politics. And what would I'd be curious as to what each of you would identify that thing to be, and how that part might be preserved even in the face of cutting edge changes.
Jackie?
I could speak to that. Yeah, that's a really great question. Political parties have historically been such an important vehicle for bringing outsider movements into the mainstream. That's been true throughout the history of our country. It was true for the abolitionist movement. It was true for the women's suffrage movement. It was true for labor's right to organize movement. It's been true over and over and over again that issues that live on the outside get brought, because of the popular support that they have, get brought into the mainstream and then ultimately into law or into the popular culture through political parties. Political parties have played that role, and that's been enormously progressive. So in that way, I'm a big fan of that aspect of what parties do in the larger political culture. An interesting and perhaps paradoxical feature of where we are now is that a movement is growing that is based around the principle, as you just said so eloquently, Mickey, that we don't want parties. We don't like the parties. We want to be able to move beyond the parties, which raises the question of, is there a political party that will carry the banner of disempowering the parties? Unlikely. And in some ways, as I understand it, the independent movement sort of lives on the edge of that paradox. And so in some ways, though, I have enormous respect and feeling for the role that parties have played historically in this way. They've actually become institutions which are a fetter to progress and to growth. And so I don't feel that this is just an abstract moral argument against partisanship. I think it has to do with what the actual circumstances are and what these institutions have become.
I think it's a great question. And I agree with what Jackie said. I'll just add a couple more things to it. One of the things that I found fascinating, now Don's a history major, so he'll know better than I, but the only thing I have yet found that all four of the first four presidents agreed on, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison, the only thing I ever found they agreed on was don't create political parties. Mm-hmm. But and they said it repeatedly and very vigorously, but what they meant was don't create the kinds of permanent factions that we have today, that are together on everything against the other team. Always. So I'm not against political parties. Political parties help sharpen the debate, that they help make the argument against whoever the incumbents are. They make the vigorous debate that democracy depends on. I think that helps. As Jackie said, they help bring people into political participation. But I don't think of, I think of the fact that we're moving beyond parties. Let me tell you something very shocking that happened was very soon after the beginning of the Obama administration, the town of Kinston, North Carolina, the people there voted to have nonpartisan local elections, council and mayor elections. Almost every town in North Carolina has nonpartisan elections. And when they did this, the Justice Department intervened and said, no, you can't do that. You have to have party labels because the minority population in your community won't know how to vote unless there's a party label, you know, to tell them how to vote, which is not, yeah, of course it's terribly insulting, right? But in addition, that's so 1800s, you know, because with the abilities we have today, so many avenues to find out what candidates believe and their life histories and everything else, you know, that you don't need the party label anymore in order to tell you. And if the party label didn't mean anything anyway. The Republican Party today, my party, is supporting in some places moderates, some places conservatives, but all they care about is the power. It's not the policy, not the philosophy. And so I think we're ready to move beyond that. Keep the parties. They organize, they get people involved, they help make the argument. Just take away from the power to keep the others off the ballot and do something, you know, and let the independents have a much stronger voice in the decision-making process.
There's a question in the back. Yes, sir.
Yes, I had a question.
Wait for the mic here.
Citizens United.
Thank you.
I had a question about Citizens United, and do the panelists see that kind of activity entrenching the present things that we don't like about the systems, about two parties having complete control? Because now they can pour all of this money in, and does that have a chilling effect on keeping those other parties out even more so at this point? Just quickly, I've observed elections around the world in Kenya, South Africa, and in Guatemala with multiple parties, 21 parties on the ballot in South Africa, for example, and people, even though they had never voted before, knew exactly what to do.
Okay. Can I go first? Let me just say one thing about this. To the beginning of your question about the effect on the parties. There was an article in the New York Times that, and I mentioned this in the book, the article was well written, but the headline was completely off. It was talking about the super PACs and all, and said that, you know, the power, the money power in politics had now been taken away from the political parties. And it was being, you know, now the super PACs were the new, you know, had replaced the parties. Well, that's nonsense. Look at who runs the super PACs. Karl Rove on one side, you know, the Democrat, you know, it's now it's the party insiders who run the super PACs. You know, they just now have a new tool, you know, and so, you know, I think that this new power just solidifies the ability of the two existing parties, you know, to kill off any challenges from other people.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think in the second part, you spoke about the first part of his question, the second part of your question, when you basically raised the issue of multi-party democracy and parliamentary systems and all of that. You know, that's, of course, as we well know, that's not been the history in this country. We have a two-party system, even though it is legal to have a third party. I once saw this poll that showed that 57% of high school students in America believed that it was illegal to vote for a third party, by the way. But a comment on the quality of our civic education. But yeah, and sometimes people say, well, wouldn't that be a solution? Shouldn't we try to move to a more parliamentary system or multi-party democracy and so forth? And Mickey and I have talked about this in the past. My own view on that is that I don't think that's where the movement is going. I think people are looking to
disaffiliate from political parties and to be free to participate in the political process without having to be a part of a political party. I think that's more the trend of where things are going.
I mean, if these two parties are so bad, why would we want more of them?
Exactly.
Another question in the back. Yes, sir.
Hello, my question's for Jackie. I know the ground rules say I'm not supposed to make a speech, but what I'd like to do is pose a contrarian view on Proposition 121 to you, and then give you an opportunity to convince me otherwise.
If you can keep it concise.
Okay.
Thank you.
I concede to you that in small races, maybe up through city council, the proposed the proposition would make it easier for an independent to get into the game. But in my opinion, for the larger races, I think what it will actually do is prohibit an independent from succeeding in the races. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a registered independent. I was and will be an independent candidate. But let me just use the governor's race as an example. As an independent, to become a candidate and make it to the November election, what really I need is about 30,000 ballot signatures, petition signatures. Now, as one person floating out there alone with maybe some helpers, and especially the internet, I can do that. Today, under today's rules, I can get on the ballot as an independent. Under the proposed rules, there's only going to be 2 survivors, and now I have to go up against 2-party machines whose real interest, and one thing they enjoy more than fighting amongst each other, is keeping an independent out. We would agree on that. In the last primary for governor, there was 874,000 voters. So to make it as one of the finalists, I may have to get 400,000 warm bodies to show up and vote. I can get 30,000 ballot signatures, but I can't get that many votes or voters.
That's the way it works.
Excuse me. Allow me to summarize your question. The way the rules work in Arizona make it harder for an independent to get on the ballot. What's your view of that in the light of our conversation?
I think his math is completely off. I mean, it doesn't matter how many votes the person got. If there's 20 candidates dividing up the vote, why do you need half the vote? That isn't the case. I mean, what happens is you have all these different groups turning it off, and if there are 5 Republicans, they're dividing up the Republican vote. If you're a libertarian, you're getting out all the libertarian vote. So no, I mean, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you don't need to get half of that 800,000. There's a lot of people dividing it up. You just need to get into one of the top 2, and it may be a much smaller number than that.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question from the general audience. Yes, sir.
I think it was, according to my notes here, I think it was Mickey who said that maybe we're pushing the wrong buttons. And I think maybe that's true. Because I think what we need is a revolution in general. Now, you have to have something that you revolt against. People really want to fight. Otherwise, it's not going to be anything. It's just a little pea in a pond. It's nothing. So the problem is the disenfranchised voter, not the right of somebody to run. The hell with that. It's the disenfranchised voters. We have 22% of the registered voters in this state who go to the primary, and they're the ones that select our candidates. What about that other 78%? They're the ones that don't have any choice whatsoever about the people that are put up there. And of course the problem is that we don't get middle of the road kind of people. Middle of the road, that's been the wise thing for a long, long time, the middle of the road, and we've cut it out. And I think people could get really peeved if we talk about disenfranchisement of the voter and not the right of the parties to do this or that.
Okay, so let me take a little executive privilege here. I think the thrust of your question is, what's the impact on the presence of independent candidates, given the tendency of people not to vote in primaries? But either one, take it. Phil.
Well, what I would say about, I think what you're pointing to is something that's very important. And as I understand it, and this sort of builds off of how you were framing it, as I understand it, what you're saying is that there's a shift going on, that the shift is away from the notion that what we need to do in order to break up partisanship is to elect independent candidates, which is very, very difficult to do under this system. But there's a shift going on where the focus has to be to empowering independent voters and changing the character and the culture of the electorate. That is revolutionary. So if you're looking for the revolution, which I think, as Mickey was saying, and certainly as I'm saying, that's happening. The revolution has begun. What you're describing is an important component of that, which is that the focus has to be on empowering from the bottom up, not looking to just send another representative to a system that's going to swallow them up and continue to reinforce the dominant culture, but to create a change on the ground from the bottom up by empowering the people and creating a system based on that, and that's where the transformation is going to come from. So that's what I hear you saying, and I'm very close to that. I totally support that.
Can I add to that in the sense that we do? I understand the point where you're making about the people who don't want to vote either in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary are kind of disenfranchised, but. We've been disenfranchising voters in this country for a very long time. How do we do it? We have elections on Tuesdays, work days, in the middle of the day, polls close at 7 o'clock. You know, hey, that's really cool if you're self-employed or you're somehow able to take off and say to your boss, okay, I'll be back in 3 or 4 hours. You know, in most states, you still have to vote in the precinct near where you live, which is really cool if you're not one of these people who takes a bus or a subway or something to get to where you work. So our system was a perfect system for the world of 1950. But we've created a system that really makes it very difficult for a lot of people to vote. So there's a lot, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with what you said. There's a lot of pieces of this puzzle, you know, that kind of narrow the range of the people who can go participate in the process.
I'm told we have time for a couple more questions. I want to ask one little risky one first, but Representative Kavanaugh. Yes, sir. And thank you for asking a question. We want to hear from people currently in our legislature for their view of this.
Thank you. I guess I'm concerned that the premise of this whole argument is that parties are bad and the solution is the top two of the open primary. Given that in California, which just did it for the first time, you had every incumbent winning who ran. Of the non-incumbents who affiliated with parties unofficially, 131 out of 136 won the election. Right. Not one independent won. How can anybody say with a straight face that this is going to do what it's supposed to do? And by the way, it's also supposed to increase turnout. California had a 31% turnout, which was the second lowest in its primary history, which was 28%. And, you know, in the medical profession, they say first do no harm. You seem to have condemned parties, blame them for a lot of the wrong, and say, let's replace it with this, with no evidence that this is going to make the situation any better. And a lot of founded fears that it's going to make things worse by removing from candidates labels that voters who don't have the time to research every name now use to differentiate between liberal and conservative candidates.
Well, you must have come in late. I question a little bit the idea that we have, that our problem is an electorate that's not smart enough to figure out what to do. Secondly, I know you came in late because you would have heard that I'm not anti-party, not at all anti-party. I'm a member of a party. I ran on a party label. I got elected on a party label. I'm against allowing parties to have the authority to keep other people off the ballot, or to draw district lines for their purposes, or to put people on committees only when they pledge loyalty to the party. I am loyal to the United States or to Arizona, if you are, not to your political party. So, I mean, and second, but wait, and let me finish. Your point about what happened, let me tell you what happened in California. It's not a matter of whether the independent won. It's a matter of, if it's one of the two major party guys who wins, or two of the same party, they have to appeal to the entire electorate. They can't have 1/10 of the community decide you're the only one who can be on the ballot.
So now we have phonies. We have conservatives and liberals who we send to our legislature, and we force them to give up their beliefs, and we make them personal pollsters to try to take the temperature of their district to see what the average political belief is.
Isn't that what
I
you're
don't
supposed
think
to do?
I don't think that works that well.
Did I understand that you hold elective office? Do you hold elective office?
Yeah, I do.
And you don't go around and talk to your constituents and find out what they believe?
I do. And I then campaign against an opponent, and I tell the electors what my position is and how I'll represent them. And when I go there, I'm true to that. I don't pretend to be a pollster who has the capability to do surveys of my entire district and divine what this magic, possibly non-existent consensus that you says exists is.
Let me give you a tip. Knock on more doors.
All right, hold on. All right.
Okay, a glib answer doesn't solve the problem. It just further muddies the waters.
Representative Kavanaugh, we respect your question. Thank you. Appreciate. Want to keep this civil. I see Terry over there and Paul. Let me ask for one more question.
Yeah.
From Terry Woods. That's a good, we didn't let you comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, only the first round has taken place, so nobody has won yet. So just at the level of your summary as to what the results of the election are, we haven't actually had the election yet in California. So I would urge you not to rush to judgment on that score. With respect to the issue of independents making it into the second round, there are actually numbers of races where no party preference or no party affiliated independent candidates did make it into the second round, and we'll see how they do in November. The likelihood is that the major party candidate in that district will prevail in this election because of the level of infrastructure and just habit that exists in those districts. But the process, and here's, if I had to urge a single thing in response to what you're saying, it would be this. Culture change is a process. The turnout was a low turnout because the turnouts are generally low turnouts in first round voting, and part of what has to happen in California is that the 3.5 million voters who are independent voters in that state, who've been kept out of primary voting, are now going to have to be reached out to and included in new and creative and energetic and aggressive ways to be invited to be a part of this new political universe. So I just don't buy the idea that after the voters who resisted what the political establishment was telling them to do in voting up the top two system in California are now going to learn and create some new ways of participating. But when you come in and you offer a summary judgment before the election is even over as to its outcome, I just think that to me, that expresses the very bias that we're talking about. Here's how it's always been. Here's the metrics. Here's how. Maybe we want entirely new metrics. Maybe we want to change the way we think about what is a successful implementation of a new system. Maybe we don't buy your criteria.
The Public Policy Institute of California.
Yes.
Like the Morrison said.
Yes.
No independents won the first round. Therefore, there will be no independents in the general election.
Well, actually, I read their report, and that's not what they said, and that's not what happened.
That's what I read. And the other point
It's not accurate, and it's not what they wrote in their report.
you can't say California generally has low turnouts. This was the second lowest turnout in all of their.
Okay. Hold on. Hey, folks. Representative Kavanaugh, again, thank you. This is a discussion with two fabulous people and not a debate in the traditional sense. Let's do something special here. Let's demonstrate that we know how to have a constructive, civil, respectful dialogue, even when we disagree. And I know several others of you want to ask a question, but this really will be our last question from Terry Edwards.
Civil debate, and you ask a bomb thrower to ask the last question. No, I think that I think I heard some, but my question's directed to Mickey. I think I understood what you were saying, and I hope so. It seems to me that this whole discussion has broken down to the parties, the party, and the independents. And I would suggest to you, and I wonder if this is what you were saying in terms of the influence on the voters, the story about the two liberals in California. I think that there's a big batch of disenfranchised voters who register as Republicans and Democrats, and that they've been lost in the discussion here. And so I don't know that it makes a lot of difference if the movement elects a lot of independent candidates, if it results in candidates who are closer to the mainstream as opposed to the extremes. Is that what you were alluding to?
Me?
Yeah.
No, wait, look, what I'm alluding to is this. I'm not looking at this from the perspective of the party. I'm not looking at it from the perspective of the ideology. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the voter. Give the voter choices. Let the voters know what all of their options are, and let them choose among those options. And that's all I'm trying to say. Don't allow these clubs. And you know, I spent my life in the Republican Party. When Ronald Reagan ran for president, I was chairman and director of his policy task forces. You know, I was a co-chairman of the platform committee at the 1980 Reagan convention. You know, I am a party person. I just don't want those parties to say to everybody else, I'm sorry, we'll tell you who you can choose between. That's, you know, I don't want them to say, we're going to redraw your district so, you know, wheat farmers are represented by somebody who's never been on a wheat farm. I mean, there's too many of them. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, I agree with what you say, so my question becomes real simple to you now. Yeah. If you succeed, if you and Jackie succeed in your movement, won't it produce candidates from the parties who are closer to the middle than the candidates are today?
Could very well.
And if that's true, isn't that a good result?
Yeah, that's exactly what would happen if that's where the people are, because it would represent where the view is. If the people are very far right or very far left, then that's who will get elected. It's not where I happen to think the people are. I actually think, you know who I think the people would vote for today in a lot of these districts, certainly in Republican districts? They would not elect Ronald Reagan. They would not elect Barry Goldwater. Reagan, nor neither. I was in the Goldwater campaign, you know, very active in the Reagan campaign. Why do you think, you know, that so many people who played key parts in the Reagan administration and the Reagan campaigns, you know, are washing their hands of what's happening? It's if the people themselves want people who are more moderate and centrist, that's what they'll choose. You know, I'm not saying that's what they should choose. I think it should be up to them.
Yeah.
Okay, it's time to close. If you'll give me the courtesy of a few seconds of final remarks before we thank our speakers. You know, to me, here's the good news. Arizona's DNA is incomplete. You move eastward in the country, things are pretty set. What we are privileged to have in this state is the ability to think, the ability to explore new ideas, the spirit of the new frontier, and we can listen to our fellow citizens with respect and dignity, even when we disagree and our blood pressure rises and our armpits have a little moisture. And that's pretty special. This Morrison Institute event is designed to do exactly what occurred tonight. So please thank all of yourselves for the way you have behaved. Thank you for your being here. And Jackie Salit and Mickey Edwards, thank you for who you are.
Thank you. You're good, Jackie. You're good. Well done.
Great job.